You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
On the weekend, I was supposed to be covering the Free Iran Global Summit, an event put on by the National Council of Resistance of Iran and the MEK, which is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. And this summit was to be dedicated to the Iranian resistance, those seeking to replace the current brutal Iranian regime, which, as we know, has no respect for religious minorities, no respect for gay rights, no respect for women, and is increasingly threatening other states in the world, notably Israel and the United States as the largest state sponsor of terrorism. No shortage of reasons why the Iranian regime has to go. I will say that what was fascinating in talking to some of the dignitaries that were there, and for the most part, they were there to listen. But some of them have become very supportive and very much, not members, but certainly very much champions of what the MEK and NCRI are doing. And one of those is Stephen Harper, who, again, has been quite a well-regarded speaker. When I told people I was Canadian, they said, "Oh, do you know Stephen Harper?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know him." And then they, of course, realize I'm a nobody. But I said, "No, I've interviewed him, and I certainly know of him, and I've followed his participation here." John Baird is someone I have talked to on a number of occasions, and he's a very passionate supporter of human rights around the world. John Baird served as Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, big supporter of Israel, big supporter of the Iranian resistance, and he's become a big supporter of the MEK. Now, I want to qualify something here, in that I've been speaking very favorably about the stories that have been told, about the invitation that I got to see some of this firsthand. But what's interesting is that this is not an organization without controversy. Until 2012, it was on the terrorism organization list in Canada, in the United States, in the United Kingdom. But I did speak to John Baird about that, and more broadly, whether this is an organization that is influential in the resistance, and whether it actually has the capacity to do what they're all talking about, which is wanting to end the regime as it currently stands.
Why are you here, first off?
I'm here to stand in solidarity with the people of Iran and their great struggle to break the yoke of a brutal government by the mullahs in Tehran and to promote that there is a better future for the people of Iran. Terrorism is the great struggle of our generation. My grandfather went to World War II to fight fascism and stayed in the Canadian Forces for 25 years and to fight communism. The great struggle of our generation is to fight terrorism. And Iran is the biggest sponsor of terrorism everywhere in the world. But the big victims of terrorism are the Iranian people themselves, and I'm inspired by their courage and bravery.
A decade ago, this organization was on Canada's list of terrorist organizations, and that of the United States and the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And that changed while you were in government, while Stephen Harper's government was in power. What was it that led to that change, and how do you go as the foreign minister of a country that view this as a terrorist organization to being here as a guest now? I mean, what is it the country's got wrong?
Well, I think if you look at both the Harper government and the Obama administration, looked at the facts and made a determination that it may have been at some point in the past, but it certainly wasn't going forward. And the fact you have a conservative government in Canada and a liberal democratic government in Washington, both do the same things, speaks to the most important thing, the truth. I'm inspired by the National Council of Resistance of Iran's 10-point plan: democracy, human rights, the rule of law, gender equality, no nuclear weapons, stopping the export of terrorism in the region and around the world. These are what people in the West have wanted to hear for a long time.
The last few conferences, I know the last two have been online, when speakers like Stephen Harper, like you, and other dignitaries have come, they've all spoken about what feels like an imminence of being able to bring this organization back to Tehran and have this event there. And I guess what I would ask you is, how close to that reform do you feel Iran is, and what's missing? What's that spark that's needed to really get that change in the regime?
Well, the regime is, no doubt, if you look at the facts on the ground, this regime is at its weakest point in more than 40 years. We were briefed yesterday on the 5,000 resistance units in every corner of the country. When change happens, when regimes fall, it'll happen very quickly. And there's no doubt we're getting closer to that day. You look at how quickly the Berlin Wall fell and Eastern Europe got freedom. The same will be the case in Tehran. The IRGC is starting to crack. The government is afraid. The fact that they were scheduling a terrorist attack on Ashraf 3 this weekend showed how much they fear this organization. The fact that they have a law in Iran that doesn't allow a woman to run for president says they're afraid, Madame Rajavi.
When you look at some of the changes in the Arab world, let's talk about Israel having all of these normalized relationships and new diplomatic relationships with Arab countries. The traditional allegiances are very much changing. And I was wondering if you saw a potential for change in the way the Arab world engages with Iran.
Well, listen, I mean, I used to look at Iran's nuclear program and support for terrorism almost exclusively through the lens of Israel. But you look at the Sunni Arab Gulf countries who, when I was foreign minister and Stephen Harper was prime minister, we had an unprecedented, warm and constructive relationship, really phenomenal. With Saudi Arabia, especially the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, to name just a few of the Gulf states. They live right across the Gulf from the mullahs in Tehran. And so they're every bit as afraid of this regime as we are. And of course, Canada, with the explosion of the Ukrainian plane, killing dozens and dozens and dozens of Canadians and even more Canadian residents, it shows you that we're not immune from the terrorism that this regime supports around the world. That was not an accident. It was a deliberate attack. And so now we've been drawn in directly as victims of this terrible government.
I recall when the former Harper government ended diplomatic ties with Iran, there was some pushback domestically from the political left. And I was wondering if you felt, looking back on that, quite vindicated with how Iran has continued to go down.
I'll start off with earlier that everyone thought that our strong and unequivocal support for Israel would kill our relationships with the Arab world. I think when we left office in 2015, we had not a good relationship with the Arab world. We had a phenomenal relationship with the Arab world. Our relationship with the United Arab Emirates, with Jordan, with Saudi Arabia, with Bahrain, with the Morsi, our support of the Morsi government's being ejected from Egypt, our support of the mission in Libya, whether it's Algeria, Morocco, I could go on and on. It was really unprecedentedly positive. And of course, we share with both Israel and the Arab world our fear of terrorism and a nuclear armed Iran. So I think it brings us all together to fight for what's right.
What do you think the role is, beyond statements of support, for countries like Canada in what this organization is advocating? I mean, I think everyone generally agrees that regime change has to be pushed from within, but what support, if any, do you think should be coming from Canada and the global community?
I think we all, or most of us at least, would acknowledge that military-backed regime change by force doesn't work. I think we saw that regrettably in Iraq. Having said that, we've got to stand with the people in the resistance. Frankly, whether they're monarchists, whether they're union members, retirees, teachers, the MEK is obviously the biggest and best organized of all the organizations. It won't be Western governments that choose the next government of Iran. It'll be a democratic choice. And I look at the 10 points in the NCRI's plan. I think Canadians and the Canadian administration should support each and every one of them. And when the people of Iran begin to do the final push to freedom, those of us outside, whether it's in the West, the Arab world, or Israel, should support their aspirations and do all we can to help.
I know that the JCPOA was not a Canadian initiative, but there have still been, especially since the Biden administration took over in the United States, perpetual rumblings about a reinstitution of that. Do you feel that form of agreement with Iran should even be on the table at this point?
Well, I just think you've got to acknowledge that the government of Iran can't be trusted. We cannot take the mullah's word. There's a long history with the last nuclear containment agreement where they broke the rules. The stash of documents that was obtained by Bibi Netanyahu's administration in Israel showed the plan to lie and to cover up. The mullahs in Tehran only respond to one thing, and that's tough resolve. And we can't show weakness. I admire John Kerry's attempt to have a diplomatic solution. I think he was well-intentioned, and I have great respect for him and his leadership in this regard. I just think we've got to be much more forceful if we want to get Iran to take a different path.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.